All right, welcome to part 3 of the quest tutorial. So in the last one, we got it set up so that you could press the tab key to open up the quest menu, and we got a bunch of the foundational stuff set up. So the next thing we need to do is add some quests to the player and then have them show up on the UI. So to do that, we need to create some quests first. So let's come back here to the content folder. So content folder, and then we go into the quest systems, and then we'll go into quests. So like I was saying before, this one right here is just the base quest that all quests are going to derive from. So if we want to create a new quest, all we have to do is derive from that. So let's right click on this and say, well, actually, before we do that, let's fill this out first because that will make our lives a little bit easier. So let's open this up. And inside of here, we just want to add a little bit of code that is going to be used by all the child classes. So the first thing we want to add is a variable. So we'll add a variable, and this is going to be our root objective collection. Okay, so real quick, just change it to be of type obj collection, bp obj collection, and hit object reference. And then we can also set this to private and move it to a private category. So what this is as the name implies, this is the root objective for the quest, like the first objective in the quest. And all quests' first objective is going to be an objective collection. Okay, so that's why it's called the root objective quest or root objective collection. So the first thing that needs to happen when a new quest is created, if we come back here to the make graph, is that we need to create this objective. So let's delete these and we'll use this little begin play here. So again, the first thing we need to do is construct the root objective collection. So let's make a function for that. So hit function and call it construct root objective collection. And then we want to set this to be private because we don't want other people calling this. It's only going to be ourselves calling this function. And then we can also move it to a private category as well, just to keep things organized. And we want to add an output parameter. So select it over here on the left, or select the node. And for the outputs, hit new parameter and change it to be of type obj collection, so objective collection. And then change the name to be something like root obj collection, just like that. So because this is an abstract base class, we don't actually want this function to be called. We want children to override this function and implement it however they want. So for right now, inside of here, well, not for right now, but what we're going to do for inside this class, we're actually just going to print a string if this function gets called, just so we're aware that, hey, this is getting called and this is a problem because we never expect this function to get called directly. We only expect the child's implementations of this function to get called. So I'm just going to say err create root objective collection called for base class exclamation point, and maybe we'll make it red or something so it's extra scary. Something like this. Because again, we don't want this function to get called because this is the base class. We want children to override this function. And so if somebody accidentally does call this, they'll get a nice little error message telling them that they messed up. Okay, so that's one function we're going to need. And then we can come back here to our event graph. So in begin play, we can just call this function like so. And then whatever this returns to us, we're going to set it to our root objective collection. So drag that in, hit set, and hook that up. So again, this function is not going to be called, it's not going to call this, it's going to call whatever child quest is implementing this function so that each child quest can construct the root objective collection however they want, depending on how the quest works. Okay, so that gets created. And then the next thing we need to do is we need to tell this root objective collection to go ahead and populate yourself with whatever objectives you need for your quest. So that's actually going to be a function inside of, well, it's going to be a function inside of the quest as well. So just like this one. So we can just right click on this one and say duplicate, except this one we'll call populate objectives. And then for this one, we want it to take in the root object collection. So we don't want an output parameter, so we can delete this, and we can delete this return node. But we do want an input parameter, so select it again, add a new parameter, make sure it's of type BP obj collection, and then change the name to be the root obj collection. And again, this is going to be a function that gets overwritten by children, so we don't want this to be called here. So we'll just add a little error message saying error populate objectives called for base class. All right, so back here in the event graph, we want to call populate objectives, and we want to pass in the newly created root objective. And then finally, the last thing we want to do is activate the objective. And I guess we'll go into that later. So we'll add a little to do here because we need to write the objectives first, but we'll say to do activate root objective, and I'll explain what that means later once we get to it. But this is what we need to do for right now. Again, we're constructing the root level objective, and then we're telling the class to populate that root level objective with whatever sub objectives it might have. Okay, and then we're going to need one more function in here, just a very simple one, to get access to this variable because we have it as private. And unfortunately, the widget is going to need access to it. And this would be better if we were doing it in C++. We could make it a little safer, but since we're doing blueprints, we can't really make use of private and protected the way it's really meant to be used. So we'll just make a function over here called get root objective collection, and we can make it pure, and we can make it const. And the reason, if you don't know what these do, pure makes it so that it doesn't require an execution pen. It's like a green type of node. Like, I'll show you an example. Like this is a pure function because it's green. You don't have to like drag into it, right? But this is like a normal function where you have to drag into it. So we're making it pure. Where was I? No, I'm completely lost. Okay, we're here. Pure and const, and all const does is saying that it's not going to change. If it's a const function, it's telling the computer that this function is not going to change anything about this class or about this blueprint. And of course, this is not going to change anything because all it's doing is getting this variable. So let's drag in the get root, or drag in the root objective collection. And if you drag off of this blue node and drag it on to here, you'll see it gives you an option to add pin to result. And you'll see it automatically creates a root or a return node for you. And then we can just hook that up like so. Okay. So now I think this class is done. Let me double check before I exit here. Yeah, I think we're good to go. I'm just trying to make sure I get everything because this is obviously kind of a complex tutorial. Okay, so now that our quest is created, now that our base quest is filled out, we can go and create a new quest. So come back to the content folder, right click on this guy and say create child blueprint class. And we will call this BP underscore quest 1. So this is our first quest. And we can take this quest and we can drag it into the world. And why is it showing like that? Did we not set this? We didn't set this up. So if you go back to the BP quest, we need to change it so that, I thought we already did this. Did I do that for the objective? Hold on one second. No, I swore I did this. Maybe I didn't. Okay, never mind. Maybe I'm crazy. So open up the BP quest, and we want to add a billboard component. So add the billboard component. And then we want to take the billboard component, we want to drag it on to the default scene root so that it replaces it. And then we want to change the texture to be RT underscore quest icon so that it shows as a scroll. And again, you can use any icon you want. You don't have to use this one. Okay, so if you compile that and come back, you can see our quest now shows up as this little scroll inside the world. And so it doesn't really matter where you put it because the location of it doesn't actually matter. So I'll just put it like over here for right now. And maybe we'll add, well, we'll just add one for right now. Okay, so we got our quest inside the world. It doesn't do anything yet, but we can at least show it inside of our inventory or inside of our quest widget. So if we come back here to our third-person character, the first thing we want to do when the game starts is we want to find all the quests that are in the level. Now, for your game, this might work differently, and you're going to have to change things. I'd highly recommend waiting until the tutorial ends to make any modifications that you need specifically for your game, because I know some games have it that quests don't unlock until you get to a specific part of the game, and so this approach wouldn't work. I mean, just this one little tiny part of it wouldn't work, because what I'm going to do is I'm just going to find all the quests at the beginning of the game and say these are all the valid quests. But if you want to make a system where you unlock quests as you go, it's very simple. All you do is, well, you'll see, because basically what we're going to do, if we come over here, let's add a variable and call it quests. And so let's change this to be a quest, BP quest, and then change it to an array. So an array is just a list, basically. So the player keeps track of all of the quests that it knows about. So if you want quests to unlock as the game progresses, you'll need to just, drag this in and add to it whenever you want the quest to be added to the player's known quest, right? Hopefully that makes sense. But again, for right now, for simplicity's sake, for this tutorial, we're just going to say, give me all the quests that exist at the beginning of the game, and those are just the quests that we're going to run with. So up here inside of begin play, we'll say event begin play. We're going to call get all actors of class. And the class, of course, is our BP underscore quest. Make sure you select the base one and not the one we just created. Make sure you select BP quest. And then we'll just go ahead and set our array to whatever array that returns, just like so. So now we are getting all the quests and saving them so that we know about them. So now back down here, when we press tab, we don't actually have to change anything here, but we press tab, it opens up this widget. So we need to make it so that this widget shows the quests that the player has. So again, let's go back to our quest widget. So hit the little magnifying glass and then open this guy up. And then I think we left it to do in the event graph. Yes, we did. So if you go back to the event graph and you go to the initialize and you go to the right, we added a little to do here for adding quests to the tree. So we can go ahead and just delete this and actually write this now. So what we want to do is we want to get access to the player. So to do that, we can use this little node, the get owning player pawn, because this is the pawn that owns the widget, which of course is the player. But we have to cast it, so we'll say cast to third-person character or whatever character you happen to be using in your game. And then from there, we can say get quests. So this gets all the quests, and we want to loop over these. So we'll say for each loop, like so. So for each one of the quests, we want to add it to our tree view. So our tree view is actually over here on the left. It's created a variable for us, but the tree view is just this guy right here, this list of quests. That's our tree view. And maybe we can name it something better than tree view 324. Let's call it the quest tree view instead, just so it makes more sense. So go back here to our graph, drag in our quest tree view, and say add item, like so, and hook this up. And the item we want to add is our quest. Well, actually, no, it's not our quest. We don't want to add our quest. We want to add the root object collection, because the tree view is a tree view of objectives. So we can't just hook this up like that. Well, it will let us, but it won't work because the tree view is expecting, if you remember, the tree view we've specified that it's a tree view of objective widgets. So we need to get the objective. So drag off of this and say get root objective collection, which is the function we made. And then we want to pass that in as the item. So again, just to recap, all we're doing is we're getting the player, we're looping over all of the quests that the player owns, and then for each quest, we're getting the root objective collection, which is the root quest, which is a collection of quests, and we're adding that to the tree view. So if we compile and save all, and we come back and we run this, hopefully if I did everything right. Oh, so we're getting errors. If you saw that at the top left, we got errors because our abstract abstract functions, or our, I don't know how to say that. Our functions inside of our abstract class are being called. Yeah, that's what I was trying to say. Which isn't good because it's expecting that they're overwritten by the child. But maybe it might still work. Let's see what it looks like. No, it didn't still work. Okay, so yeah, so we need to set it up. Well, there's a lot of things we need to do. Yeah, we need to set it up so that our quest that we just created overrides those functions. But we don't need to quite do that. I'm trying to think of the best way to do this next. Yeah, we should probably do that first, actually. So let's go back to the quest we created. So go back to quests and go to BP quest 01 and then go to the event graph. So yeah, this could be tricky. So it's hard to do this in a good order that is like shows progression as we go along, because there's so many parts that are, I don't want to say intertangled, but related to each other. But so I'm trying to do this in a way that makes the most sense. So again, the problem is that our parents functions are still being called, and we need to fix it so that we override those. So let's just go ahead. We don't need any of this, so we can just delete this. And again, make sure you're inside of your BP quest 01 and not the base class. And then we can hit overrides here. And you can see we have override options for the functions we created. So we want to override construct root objective collection, so select that one. And then we also want to override populate objectives, so override populate objectives as well. So let's start with the construct root objective, because that gets called first. So if you remember, this gets called from the quest, and it's expecting us to populate our root objective collection and return it. Now we want to delete this node because this node is just calling our parent, which our parent is this one, which we don't want to call. So we want to just come and we want to delete this. So we delete this. And inside of here, we want to construct it ourselves. So we'll say construct object. Yeah, construct object from class. So this is how you create an object as opposed to an actor. You have to use construct object of class. So hit this. And the object we want to create is our obj collection. So select this, and then hook up that, hook up this, and hook up this. And then the outer, we want to use ourselves. So we'll say get self reference, just like that. Okay, so that's, hold on, let me look at something real quick on my other project. Quest 1, construct, okay. Yeah, so there's some things we need to fill out for this objective collection. So let's go ahead and open this guy up, hit this little magnifying glass, and come here. So if you remember from the first part of this tutorial, I was saying that quests can have optionally, they can have their objectives required to be completed in order versus not in order. So we want to add a boolean here. So add a little variable and call it order required. And then make sure so we want to select instance editable, blueprint read only, expose on spawn, and private. And I'll just go through these real quick to tell you why we're checking all these. So instance editable makes it so that you can edit this variable per instance, which obviously we want because we want to be able to edit this per objective. Blueprint read only makes it so that you can't change it. If you try to drag it in and set it, you can't actually change it. You can only be set once during creation, which is what we want. Expose on spawn makes it so that when we're creating an instance of this, it will expose it, and I'll show you that in a second. And then private is obviously just making it so that no other class can change this but ourselves. So we want that. And then the other thing we want to add is inside of the objective base class. So if we come back to browse and we go to objective, we should probably just fill this out, to be honest. So go to the objective base class like I just did. And inside of here, we want to add a variable as well and kind of make it the same type of expose on spawn and all that stuff. So add a variable, and we'll call this the objective name, and make it of type name. And again, we're selecting all of these for the same reasons as before. And then we're also going to need a boolean here for if it's active. So say is active. And we'll come back. We'll talk more about active later, but for now, let's just create it because we're going to need it. And I guess while we're here, let's just create some other functions we're going to need, because there's really no honestly good way to do this that's going to make like 100% sense until it's all done. So come up here, create a function. We'll call it get objective name. So this function, pretty self-explanatory. It's just going to get the name of the objective. So we can just take the objective name, drag it in, say get, hook it up, and hook that up, like so. And then for this one, since it's just a getter, we can make it pure and const, just like we did for the other one. And then we want another one. So make another function and say, call it get is complete. So what this function is responsible for is returning whether or not the quest has been completed or not. So by default, we want it to just return true because this is just the base class. So select the node and then add an output pin. And we'll just call it is complete and make sure it's set to a Boolean. And like I said, it's going to just return true by default. It doesn't really matter what you return by default because this should never really get called, but we'll just say true by default. And then finally, we want to add a get is active function. Oh, and this one can be pure and const as well, and same with this one, pure and const. And so is active, all it's going to do is return this is active bool, which again, we'll talk more about what active means later, but for now, just go ahead and hook that up. Okay, so that's our base class set up. Oh, there is one more thing we should add here, actually. We're going to need a way to activate the quest, and I guess we should just talk about activate because I keep talking about it. So what active does, when a quest is active, that means it's going to show up in the tree view. So a quest is not active an objective is not active if it's in a sequence and the sequence requires that you complete them in order, and the ones before the current one have not been completed yet. So in the part 1 video, if you're thinking back to the first example I did where I had to visit the 3 cities, only the first city, only that objective was active because that's the only one that I actually complete. The other objectives were not activated yet until I completed the first one. So that's what active means. So we want to add a little event here for activating the objective so that other people so that we can determine when it gets activated. So right click, say add custom event, and call it activate objective, and then drag in is active, set, and make sure you set it to true because we're activating it. All right, so that's our base class. So now we can come back to our BP objective collection and finish filling this guy out. So we added our ordered required Boolean. The next thing we need is an array of objectives that it keeps track of. So hit this little variable, and we'll call this objectives, and then change this to be an array of objectives. So we want to change this to be BP objectives, and make sure you select objectives and not objective collection. So objectives, and change it to an array. And then we can set this to, well, we should probably leave it public because the widget's going to need access to it, so we'll just leave it public for now. All right, let me think here for a second. So, so the first thing we want to do is, well, it doesn't really matter. There's a lot of things we need to do. So we need to override the activate objective event so that when this objective gets activated, it knows how to handle it. So let's just go ahead and write that. So up here at the top, under functions, say I'm going to override the activate objective event. And so the first thing we want to do is we want to call our parent. So right click and say add call to parent function. And the reason we're doing that is because if you take a look at the parent function, it's setting active to true, which of course we want to do if it's being activated. So we want to call that. And then the next thing we want to check is if order is required or not. So drag in order required, drag off this and make a branch, like so. And the reason we're doing this is because if order is not required, then we just want to go ahead and activate all the objectives in the collection. But if order is required, then we only want to activate the first objective, basically, or the next one in the list, I should say. So If order is not required, that's the easiest case, so we'll go ahead and write that one first. So we just want to drag in the objectives and do a for each loop. And like I was saying before, we want to just activate all the objectives. So drag off of this and say activate objective. Like so. Pretty simple. But if order is not required, then we want to only activate the first one, or really not necessarily the first one, but the next unactive objective in the list, right? So we need a little function that's going to help us find the next incomplete objective in the quest. So to do that, let's just make a little function over here, and we'll call it find next. Okay, I guess it stopped typing. Find next incomplete objective. And we can make this private and set it to private since nobody else is going to be calling it. So inside of here, this is going to be a pretty simple function. We just want to go through all of our current objectives in the list, and we want to loop over them until we find one that is not complete, and then we want to return that one. So drag this guy in, and we'll do a for loop. So for each loop, and then we'll say get is complete, and then we want to say is it not complete, so we'll say not boolean. So if the objective is not complete, then that's the one we want to return. So we'll do a branch, and if it's true, then we will return it. So we want to add a return node, so select this guy, and over here on outputs, we want to add a new one. If it lets me, new one, and the return type is going to be of type objective, so we'll say objective. Where is it? Objective, BP objective, and we'll call this the next objective, like so, and hook that up to true, and then we need to just add this one. So I'm going to make a little reroute node, drag this down, and then drag this guy around here. Okay, and then if it is false, we just want to keep looping, which it will. And then if it completes, then if this loop completes, that means we never found one, because otherwise it would have returned. So if this loop completes, then we just want to return an empty node, indicating that there is no incomplete objective. Oh, this should say objective up here. Find next incomplete objective, not object. Find next incomplete objective. Okay. So again, just to recap, all this function is doing is it's looping over the objectives. It's finding the first one that is not complete, and it's returning that one. And if it can't find any that are not complete, then it just returns an empty objective, basically. So now we can come back here to our event graph. And over here, we want to call that function. So drag this guy in. And we can hook this up. So once we found the objective, we want to make sure it's valid, because again, it could not be valid if there's no incomplete objectives. So we'll say is valid, like so, hook that up. So if it is valid, then we want to go ahead and activate it. So, because again, we are inside of the activate objective. So we want to call activate objective. Now, I'll try to explain as best I can, but so we've activated the next objective in the list, but we're going to need to know when that objective is complete, because once it's complete, we need to activate the next objective in the list, right? So we need a way of knowing when this objective gets complete. And for something like that, that's a prime candidate for using an event dispatcher. So we're going to put an event dispatcher inside of our objective that gets dispatched whenever the objective is complete. So let's come back here to our base objective, BP objective, and over here on the left, we want to add an event dispatcher. So hit this, and we'll call it on completed. And so we need this to take in one input parameter, which is going to be the objective that was completed. So hit this little new parameter button, and it's going to be of type objective again, or BP objective. And we'll call this the objective, like so. Now, as far as where this gets called from, we're going to have to write that a little bit later, but for right now, we'll just assume that's going to get called because we haven't actually written that code yet. But back here inside, where were we? We were in this collection, yeah. So back inside a BP object collection, we want to bind to that event. So if we drag off of here, drag off of here, which is our objective, and we say assign on completed, it will do two things. It will create a bind function for us, which goes ahead and binds us to this event, which it also created. So we can hook this up and hook that up. Now, this is where it gets a little tricky, if it hasn't already been tricky already. So when this gets called, so when the event, or when the objective is completed, we want to go ahead, like I was saying before, we want to go ahead and activate the next objective in the list, right? So we really want to kind of start all of this over, more or less. So what we're going to do is we're going to drag this guy over here. And I'm just going to kind of drag this guy over here. And you'll see what's happening here once we get it finished. But let me think of a good way to put this. So yeah, we're going to bind this guy over here. And then the very first thing we want to do when this gets called is we want to unbind from it, because otherwise, like, you don't want to just have bindings hanging around. So we want to call unbind event from onComplete. And then the event we want to unbind is this event right here, so we'll just hook that up. And then from there, we just want to continue. So we want to go into here, just like that. Maybe we can make this a little bit cleaner if I make a little reroute node. So I'm going to make a little reroute node and then drag this down. I'll show you guys what it looks like when we're all done, so it's not too confusing here. Bring this over, make a little, just trying to clean this up as easy as I can so you can see exactly what's going on here. And again, I'll zoom out and show you this in a second. I just want to get it nice and looking good. Okay, so again, this is what's happening. Feel free to pause it here and copy this, but this is what it needs to look like. So just to recap, what it's doing is whenever the objective collection is activated, we are calling our parent function, which just activates it. It's just that boolean to true. And then if order is not required, then we are just simply activating all the objectives because they should all be activated, because who cares what order they do them in. But if order is required, then we're coming along here and then we're going down to here. So we're starting right here and we're saying, okay, find me the next incomplete objective. And then we'll take that next objective and we'll go ahead and activate it. And then after we activate it, we bind to the onCompleted event so that we know when it gets completed. And so once it gets completed, it comes back here and it calls this event. And then we just unbind from it so that we're not continued to be bound to it because we don't need it anymore. And then we go ahead and we find the next one. And so that just keeps happening until finally we've completed all the objectives in order. File, save all. Okay, so we're going to do one more quick thing and then we're going to go on to the next part. So the last thing we want to do here is kind of back where we were before we went off on this tangent, is in our BP quest 01. You can see now this construct node has two more variables. If you don't see these here, you might have to right click and say refresh nodes, but you should see them. So these are the variables that we've set to expose on spawn. I remember I said I'd explain what that means in a little bit. So that's what that means. Whenever you check that variable to expose on spawn, it exposes them here inside of where we're spawning them. So let's just fill out the objective name first. So I think we'll make this one the a long way home. So a long way home. And again, you can make this whatever you want, but whatever name you put here inside of this specific object collection is going to be, or it's going to appear as the name of your quest, more or less. So you want to think of this as the name of your quest. And then if you want the objectives inside of this to require that they be completed in order, then you can check this checkbox. So for me, I'm going to, since that's how the quest worked in the first one. But one distinction to make here is that, or one important thing to note here is that you can have a quest that has some things that must happen in order and some things that don't have to happen in order. This order require boolean is only talking about the direct children of the objectives inside of this objective. So, for example, if you had, like, you know, go to city A, go to city B, and go to city C, you can say, okay, add all those to this collection and require that they happen in order. So you have to go to A, B, and C. But let's say when you were inside of city A, you had to go and you had to talk to 7 different people, and you didn't really care what order they talked to them in as long as they talked to all of them. This system still supports that. Just because you're selecting order required here doesn't mean that everything inside of the quest requires to happen in order, because when you go and you create that collection to talk to the 7 people, you'll also have this checkbox and you can just not check it. And so it will make it so that you have to visit the cities in order, but you don't have to talk to people in order inside the cities. So it's really, you can create it. I try to make the system in such a way that you can, pretty much do whatever you want with it and you'll have total freedom. Okay, so we have this set up, and then finally we need to set up populate objectives. So let's see. Populate objectives. So yeah, so here is where we populate the root objective, because again, it's passing us the root objective, so we need to populate it with objectives. So to do that, or maybe we should go on to part. No, we'll just keep going. Who cares? We'll just keep going. We'll stop at some point maybe. So depending on your quest, obviously you're going to have different things inside of here per quest. But for this specific quest, because this is the A Long Way Home quest, for this quest we just want to go to point A to point B to point C. So we'll keep it simple here to start off with. So let's go ahead and right click and say construct object from class. And the object we want to create is our objective reach destination. So obj reach destination. So you can see what we're kind of doing here is we're constructing a objective for reaching a destination, because that's what this specific quest requires. So for this name, we'll say reach Megaton, I think is what I called it last time. So this is just like the city name. You can type whatever you want here, like reach city 1 or whatever. But this is just saying, where you need to go basically. So let's hook this up. And then the outer is going to be our self. So we'll say get self reference. Now there's one thing we need to add to the objective reach destination objective, which is obviously the destination, because we would love to be able to specify the destination here as just a little pin where we can drag into it and say this is where they need to reach, right? And that way we can reuse this for multiple destinations. So let's go ahead and do that real quick. So hit this little magnifying glass to browse to the objective reach destination. And so inside of here, we want to add a variable for the destination. So I'm going to hit variable, and we'll call it destination. I'm going to take a drink of water. Hold on. Okay. So the destination, the variable type for this, we want it to be, let me think actually. Yeah, we want it to be a trigger base. Now you could select trigger box or capsule or sphere or volume or whatever, but if you select base, then it will accept any of these because it's the base class. So we'll select trigger base for our destination. And again, we want to make this all of these checkboxes just for the exact same reasons as before, so we can edit it on expose and all that good stuff. And I guess while we're here, we'll fill this guy out because we're going to need to do that anyways. So one other variable we want is a variable to keep track of if we've reached the destination or not. So we'll call this reached destination, and we'll make it a boolean because it's just going to be true or false, like so. And we can make this guy private, so select him and make him private. Okay, so this is an objective just like any other objective. So if we want to make special changes to it, we need to override those same functions. So when the quest gets activated, we want to do something specific. We want to bind to this destination. So we're going to say override and override the activate objective. And again, just like we did for the collection, we want to right click and say add call to parent function. And then when this objective gets activated, we want to bind to the trigger volume so that we know when we overlap with it. And the reason we want to do that when the quest gets activated and not in begin play, for example, is because since it requires that things, well, I'm trying to think of a good way to explain this. You don't want to be able to complete the objective before the quest has started, at least not in this case. Because if you go to, if the objective is go to city A, then B, then C, and you go to C, then B, then A, well, you don't want uh, going into city C to like suddenly update the quest because the quest requires that you do them in order, right? So maybe that's not a great example because but like a better example might be like, if you were baking a cake and you had to like, you know, mix the whatever and then put it in the oven and then icing it. And if you like somehow try to icing it first, like obviously you don't want that to happen. So that was probably a horrible explanation, but whatever. So long story short, we want to bind to the overlap event once the task becomes activated. So once it becomes activated, we're going to drag in the destination here, and we're going to say assign on actor begin overlap. And so this is going to get called whenever the destination trigger box gets overlapped with. And we want to make sure that the thing that overlapped with it is the player. So we'll say cast to third person character. And if it is the character, then we want to, well, first of all, we want to unbind from this. So we'll say, copy this destination again. We'll say unbind from begin overlap, unbind event from on actor begin overlap. Yep, that's the one. And then we'll hook this event up to here again, because that's the one we're unbinding from, obviously. Make this a little cleaner, like so. And then finally, we want to say that we reached the destination. So drag that in and set it to true. And then the very last thing we want to do is we want to call the on completed event dispatcher. So we'll say call on completed, like so. And we will pass in our self for the objective. So we'll say get self reference because we are the objective that has been completed, right? All right. And then the other thing we want to override here, if we look at our override options, we have overrides for getting it active. We don't need to override that. We really don't have any reason to. We don't need to override the objective name because it's already set. But we do want to override is complete because we only want to return that it's complete if we've reached the destination. So let's override this one. And inside of here, we don't want to call the parent. We will just return reached destination like so. So there we go. Pretty straightforward. Hopefully, all we're doing is we're just binding to this trigger box, and then when we overlap with it, we say we reached the destination, and then we broadcast that it was completed, right? So this is an example of of an objective that you could create in your game, and you can use the same design to implement any type of objective that you want. And we'll be doing one more for the light. So hopefully after we do this one and we do the other one, they'll start making more sense. Because as you can see, you can specify, what determines if it's complete, what happens when it activates. And so you can really make these do whatever you want. I'm just so happen to, have it work with reaching a destination. But if it's not making sense yet, again, we're going to be doing one more of these things for turning on a light. And hopefully it will start making more sense after that. And then if it makes sense, then you should be able to write them on your own for your game to be whatever you want. Okay, so now that we have this this objective completed for reaching a destination, let's go back to our quest 1. So back here, we were in the middle of populating the objectives. And let me go back to my example code. So we now have this destination pin. So if you don't have it, again, you might just have to refresh node. Where is it? Refresh nodes for this to show up. But whatever we pass here is going to be the destination trigger box that it uses to determine if you've completed this objective. And so we're just going to promote this to a variable. And we'll call this so this is for Megaton, so we'll call it Megaton objective, or Megaton trigger, might be better. And we want to set this to be all of these as well so that we can, edit it on spawn or edit it in an instance of the world. And for the same reasons we had everything else. And just the same reason we checked these checkboxes last time. And then once we've created the objective, we just want to add it to our root objective collection. So we'll say get root objective collection. and we can delete this parent, we don't need this. And we want to say add, we didn't write that yet. So we need to write a add objective function so that we can add objectives to this collection. So that is actually going to be inside of our objective collection. So let's open this guy up. And we want to add a public function. So we'll make a function here and call it add objective. So add objective. And I'm going to put this in a public category just to make things organized. And all this is going to do is add to our objectives array. So we'll drag this in. And we'll say add, and we'll hook this up. And then we can just drag straight off of here over here, and it will make a new pin for us. And I'm just going to call this, or rename this to objective, like so. Let me think. I guess there's one more thing we can do while we're here. Let's also override the is complete for the objective collection. So hit this drop down and say get is complete because we want to override this. So if you think about it, for objectives collections, which are just multiple objectives, we want to say that it's complete if all of these sub-objectives are also complete. Well, not also, but are complete, right? So to do that, it's pretty straightforward. We're just going to drag in all of our objectives. We'll do a for each loop. And then, again, we just want to say if they're all complete, we want to return true. If they're not all complete, we want to return false. So we'll say get is complete. And if this is not true, then we will do a branch like so. So if it's not true, then we want to return, just go ahead right away and just return false. But if it completes, then that means it got through all of the quest without, or it got through all the quests without returning. So we want to return true because they're all complete at that point. Okay, that was just a little side thing we had to do. I think we are good now, so we can go back to our BP quest 1, and we can now call add quest, or add objective, sorry. And the objective we want to pass in is this guy. Okay, so hopefully, knock on wood, if I did everything right, we should at least see something happening in our UI. So let's go ahead and run this and press tab. And you can see we now have this text block, which doesn't really do anything yet, but it's showing. Hooray. So this is our quest. Obviously, we need to make it so that we can click on it and that we can see our sub-objectives and that it shows the correct name and all that good stuff. But for now, it's at least recognizing that there is something in our player that's a quest and it's attempting to show it. But again, we need to add some more code to make it show up correctly. I told you guys this was going to be a long tutorial, but hopefully you guys can stick with me. I'll see you guys in the next part.